So I think today's video is a bloody banger. It's not the first time I've said that, but I just ran a race lately. I ran 29:55, it was the Elmbridge Road 10K, and trust me when I tell you that I hate racing. I don't hate every race, but I have a bloody awful relationship when it comes to racing. I overcomplicate it, I often get very anxious around races. I tend to make them way more complicated than they're supposed to be. I overthink it, I put too much pressure on myself internally, and then I can't even perform at perhaps the level that I should have. I'm always trying to almost over-prepare to get rid of some of that anxiety, and then I often don't race in the build-up to bigger races because of that. There's a fear there, and then because I don't race in the build-up, heading towards the bloody bigger goal, I end up hurting my chances of achieving the bigger goal because racing is so important. Racing is what moves the training to another place. Racing is what shows you where you're at. But here's some advice. Watch today's video, listen to some of these tips, and from now, when you're training, when you're racing, start to add some of this stuff in. Start to reframe how you're sort of targeting training. And specifically, let's start to reframe how you're targeting races, what sort of goals you're setting, what you're asking of the body and the brain. I think this one's really going to help you. Okay guys, so one final thing before we jump into today's video. A lot of you guys that are watching aren't subscribed. And so if you could just hit that like button, perhaps comment and possibly subscribe, I'd be really grateful. I've had a bad relationship with racing. It's not that I don't like working hard. So anytime that you don't like something, or you have a fear of something, or you're kind of not up for something, it's always worth asking yourself, what is it about whatever that is that I'm not up for? And in this scenario, it's racing. What is it about the racing experience that you don't like? Is it the working hard? Is it the you don't like working hard with other people? Is it the fact that you're going to be out there in a public place and maybe you don't like being in public places? Is it that you have to compete at a certain time of the day? Is it the travel to the race? Is it the cost of the race? In order to figure out what's going on in your own little world when it comes to racing, or perhaps a poor relationship with racing, you do have to strip it back to decide, what is it about racing I'm actually not that keen on? And so when I started digging into the, I don't really like racing, I don't have this good relationship with racing, and where I would go with that is I'd enter races, and then as I'd get closer to that race, I'd just find that sort of itchy feet about it. Oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. Oh, maybe there's a better race. Maybe this will disrupt training and I shouldn't do it. All those little excuses or those negative emotions that are going on, that's trying to keep you safe. That's trying to keep you away from a situation that you don't want to put yourself into, which in this scenario is of course the race. And so I tried to think about it, like what is it about racing that you're not up for? Why are you not excited about racing like you are about training? I'm a professional athlete, I get paid to run, but a lot of the training that I do it because I love it. I do it because I think it's brilliant for my mental health. I've quoted often enough that the day I believe that going out there and pushing yourself on a track or a road path or a grass field, the day I don't believe that's good for you is the day that I'll quit the sport. And until that day comes, which I don't think it'll ever come, I'll not be quitting running anytime soon. But I was trying to figure out, like, what's this deal with, racing? And I've worked with psychologists in the past. I had a very good sports psychologist and mentor in Michael Gervais over in America, and that Under Armour helped set that up. That was, pretty awesome time. But I remember asking him, what's the deal with racing? Why do people change, I think is what I was sort of asking. Like, why have you got these really confident people, and then when it gets to race day, they sort of fall apart. The confidence goes away and it's replaced with like anxiety or dread or self-doubt and all this stuff. And one of the techniques that has now really helped me, that sort of came out of that conversation, was that what we're doing is, when it comes to training, we visualize training as something that we're really capable of doing. And sometimes that's because there's less pressure, less expectation, you're maybe by yourself, or you're with a group of people that have seen you train well lots of times, and so if it doesn't go as well that day, it's not as big a deal. But when it comes to races, we build races up to be this huge event, right? And I sort of explained it lately as, think of like training as like, you know, the garage at the side of your house, right? That's training. And I said this on a podcast, or even think of it as the first floor of your house if you're, you know, fortunate enough to have 2 floors. But think of it as a, you know, just that's the size, that's the scale. And then we think racing is like the Eiffel Tower, right? And we put this race in our calendar, and it's like, here's this, you know, garage on the side of the house, and that's training, that's the scale. And here's this bloody big Eiffel Tower, and that's a race. So when it comes to training, it's something that you think you're capable of doing. It's not always easy, but you're capable. When it comes to racing, you're picturing your ability and your capability-ness, if that's a word, to do it, as looking up to this big Eiffel Tower. Like it's this big, massive, important thing. And that's the mistake. I built a slogan and even merchandise around the idea of just another Sunday. And that worked super well for me going into Dublin Marathon. I built this whole idea that it wasn't that it was on a Sunday, which of course it was, but it was the concept of it's just another run. I don't know why we build racing to be this huge big thing when it's not. It's literally the exact same as training, only possibly a little bit longer in terms of 1 rep. Maybe in training you do 2K reps, 3K reps, 1K reps, and now you're going to race 5K or 10K. But the effort isn't hugely different. What you're asking your body or your brain to do isn't hugely different. And what I said on my podcast lately, which I think is going to be really helpful, and it's why I really wanted to, you know, publish this video today. I was at the track and I was doing 1K a bit harder, 1K at tempo, 1K a bit harder, 1K at tempo. And I did the first K a bit harder, and I complicated the entire rep, right? And I end up running, I think, 250 for the 1K, and my legs don't feel good, and I'm all tense, and I'm not breathing really good, and I sort of explained it as like I was bloody buckling. And in the process of struggling, I decided I don't think I can do 8 of these today, you know, 4 at harder effort, 4 at, you know, threshold. And what I did was I already sort of like, not chickened out, but I was already bailing on the idea of doing the session. And as I was sort of jogging the recovery bit, I thought to myself, there must be 80 to 85 people at the track this morning. Track was busy, you know, good atmosphere, good vibes. Must be 80 to 85 people at this track this morning. If you asked every single athlete at that track to do 1K pretty hard, right? That's it. 1K pretty hard, 1K at tempo. 1K pretty hard, 1K at tempo. We're not asking you to run it at a certain speed. We're not asking you to set a record. We're not asking you to do anything. 1K pretty hard. I thought to myself, if I've been doing this for 20 years and I've ran those bloody 75,000 miles, I really think I'm capable of running 1K pretty hard, 1K at tempo. So where's the problem in that? The problem is when you add in other expectations. I want to run at this pace. I want it to feel this way. I want my technique to look like this. There's no doubt that these things will become important. There's no doubt that what speed you're going to run on race day has a level of importance. I'm not disputing it. But that was the same connection to racing. I didn't have a problem with, you know, running 10K pretty hard. I didn't have a problem with going and running in public. I didn't have a problem paying my entry fee. I certainly didn't have a problem with other people being there. I love that side of it, especially when you win, because people make you feel really good about yourself. I understood that my problem in this entire equation was that the second that I added in anything other than the fact I was gonna go compete on just another Sunday, that's when the problem started. The human brain does this wonderful thing of complicating what doesn't need to be complicated. So we'll take a rewind back. It's Monday, you're going to compete in 6 days' time. And instead of thinking, I'm going to enter this 10K and I'm going to go run, and I'm going to go run a 10K pretty hard. I want to see how training's been going, and we'll see how it goes. Not only do I want to see how training's been going, I also want the stimulus of a good hard race. No better way to move your fitness forward than to get stuck into a race and run at a slightly higher intensity than you have been in training. 10K pretty hard. So you go back to that Monday, and instead of setting this up or framing it as, on Sunday, I'm going to go run 10K pretty hard. I genuinely believe there is millions of people in this world that can run 10K pretty hard. Just like I spoke about that 1K pretty hard on the track. I'm not going to suggest there's millions of people who can go and break 30 minutes like I happen to do, but that's not the goal. The goal is to run 10K pretty hard. If you've trained well, if you've recovered well, ate well, slept well, looked after all the little things, then the result is dependent on all of that, not what you write down on Monday. And so I think a lot of the problem is that on Monday you write down, I want to run 28:30 for 10K, right? So suddenly you have to look the course up, because to run 28:30, you might need the course to look a certain way. You might need the weather to be a certain, sort of wind speed. And then you might sort of start looking up the competition that you're going to race against. You might sort of look up, is the race on gravel? Is it on road? Is it cross country? What time of day is it at? Is it hot? You can see where this is going. The second you add in an extra agenda, then I want to run 10K pretty hard, the brain starts working its way. How could I complicate this more? What sort of weight are you at the minute? How much mileage have you been doing? What's your best session lately? If you want to narrow in on those details, you use those details from the training to give you perhaps a guide of what you might be capable of on race day. That might set up how you race, your first 1K, your first 2K, so you don't go off maybe a little bit too hard. But when you start putting labels or expectations on finishing time or finishing position, that's when the brain really goes to town on the recent training. What sort of weight are you at? Like, have you been hitting those sort of splits in training? Can the course allow for that time? Can the weather allow for that? And I'm not saying at some point of, this running journey, something like that will happen. But probably there's only 1 to 2 races a year where you really need to focus in on that. Give yourself the best opportunity of running fast by picking a course that will allow for that. Pick a race in a month of the year that is not going to be super hot. But even on that day, that bigger occasion, and you've set it up that hopefully it gives you the best chance of success, it's still 10K pretty hard. And I genuinely believe there are millions of people in this world that can go out there and run 10K pretty hard. It's when we start labeling it or framing it to be something other than 10K pretty hard that suddenly we close that sort of gap of how many people would be capable, and even start questioning if we're capable. And that's a big, big problem. And so for your next race, or even training, just like I did, start to frame it differently. Start to set training up to reflect that. When you're out there doing your next set of intervals, do me a favor and just picture it as, it's just 800 pretty hard, or it's just 2K a little bit harder than that previous one. It doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to be a certain pace. It doesn't have to be a bloody stupid heart rate. There is times that these things are important, but you need to start treating running as just, it's a lot more simple than we're really making it. A lot of the time, if you're doing a session like I was and you're alternating efforts, just run one of the efforts a little bit easier and run the next one a little bit harder. With more experience, with a more detailed program, you might get into certain heart rates. But I do believe a lot of the problems in running come when you start adding these extra pressures. It's pressure enough just getting out there and exercising, but it's bloody brilliant for you, so you should keep doing it. If you want more advice, you can go to joggingroom.com. There's training plans on there. There's also tips for your nutrition stuff, your psychology, your strength conditioning. I think those are the areas that you should be really doubling down on. Those are the areas that if you want to bloody complicate it, complicate what you're doing outside of the training, and make sure you're keeping that side of your life quite simple and basic to focus on the recovery. Get your nutrition in a really good place. There's heaps of tips there. There's also merchandise on joggingclo.com. But I appreciate you supporting the channel. Like, subscribe, do all those lovely things, and take care.